I've been patiently waiting for the day to install it, and that day has finally come. Here's the part I've been storing for so long. So I'm gonna go ahead, open this thing up and show you guys what it looks like. So here we have the R34 GTT Nismo Cluster. They have a couple of variants of these. So they have this one, which is for the GTT. They have one that looks almost identical, and it is for the GTR. And they have another GTR one with the white face. These are now discontinued. You can still find them. And if you guys want to get one, hit me up. I'll find one for you and I'll get it sent over to you. So let me know if you guys are interested in purchasing a Nismo GTT cluster. I got this a long time ago. I got it for a good deal. Cluster might not work with this car is because this car was once an automatic, and this is actually a 25 GT version of the Nissan Skyline R34. This is for R34 GTT. We're hoping all goes well because this car was swapped to manual with the RB25 DET, but I guess we're gonna find out as soon as we throw that cluster in. So if you guys are changing out your cluster, two things I recommend to do and one thing you guys need to do. The first thing that I recommend to do is take a picture of your kilometers so you know where your old cluster was left at, and you know you could just add those kilometers to the new Nismo cluster and you'll know exactly how many kilometers are on your car. Second thing I recommend to do is take a picture of your gas level. That way when you connect the Nismo cluster, you can make sure that matches also. Final thing you guys need to do before you guys start this is disconnect your battery. After you take the pictures, of course, because without the battery you can't take a picture of the kilometers. So disconnect your battery before you start removing the cluster and installing the new one. So we're going to go ahead and start on the removal process of this OEM cluster, and in order to do that, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, I believe 4 screws down here that we have to remove in order to remove this upper cap right here. And you got to do this, bring your steering wheel all the way down. There's also 2 screws. There's one right here, one right here. That's all the screws we need to remove to get to the cluster. To remove the cluster itself, there's only 1, 2, and 3 screws. So we're gonna remove those 3 screws and pull the cluster out, disconnect it, and we'll go from there. All right, so the original R34 25 GT cluster is out, and here we have the R34 Nismo GTT cluster in hand. So by the looks of it, you can see how much better this looks compared to this, and eventually I might pop this screen off and add a carbon in that section right there. I believe they sell those carbon pieces, so I might just purchase one down the line or make my own. Not quite sure yet, but we'll figure that out as we move along. The car used to be an automatic, so it has this section here for the park, reverse, neutral, drive, etc. And this one is for the GTT manual, so this one does not have that. Looking here at the back, looks like they're exactly the same. They're identical. They have the same plugs. So hopefully the speed sensor works on this one. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to work. If not, I'm going to have to figure out how to rewire it in order for this to work. By the end of this video, this cluster is going to be working just fine how it's supposed to. I'm going to figure that out. And I love that it has the orange on there, and you guys will see why later on down the road. So these instructions do say to remove the steering wheel just to make the install much easier. I ended up just removing the turn signal section here to slide the cluster in through here, and that works just fine. So the R34 GTT cluster is now on, and man, this thing looks so much better. It still looks a little bit off because this interior is kind of out of whack right now. I haven't turned on the car yet to see if it works. That's the next step. We're gonna go ahead and clear out the shop real quick, make some room so I could get the car out of here and at least drive it 5 to 20 miles an hour just to make sure the gauge is working and the RPMs. If the speedometer works, hopefully it does. I'll take you guys along for the ride. All right, now let's just turn these on so you guys can see a little bit better. Put it in a first gear, and not looking good, not looking good. All right, so it's not reading the speed. speed as I figured. So as you guys saw, the cluster speed was not working. So I think I figured out how to wire it now. And if everything goes well, I'll show you guys and explain to you guys exactly what I did to wire the cluster for the speed to work. Now it's the moment of truth to test out this cluster and see if the speed works. So we're gonna hold the brake, clutch in. Because of the steering wheel. I want to show you guys exactly how I did this. All right, so you guys see these wires here running up to the cluster. So we got this black wire right here running into pin number 19. You see that plug, that orange wire on that plug. I'll take this cluster off in a bit and show you guys exactly how I wired this. That plug right there is wired, goes down to the speed sensor, and the other wire goes directly to that ground right there. So this is how we're gonna wire this thing up. I just did it through here real quick just to test it out, make sure everything works. I was scared that the speed sensor wire goes to the ECU, from the ECU to the cluster, and I figured that wouldn't work. But I guess it doesn't. I guess it goes directly to the cluster. From the cluster, it sends signals to the ECU and to the rest of the stuff on the car. Since I had to make a new harness for the speed sensor, this is a wire I use. I use a 20 gauge wire from Amazon, copper wire I should say. It comes with a black and red wire along with this protector tubing here that I got. I already taped this up because this is what I have left over from what I ran from the inside of the car to the engine bay and back up to the cluster. So what I did is I took the first portion of the wire. Once I took the first portion of the wire, I taped it up just to make sure the wire wouldn't move. And as I went along, I taped it up about every 6 inches. As I pulled the wire through the grommet in the firewall, and I kept doing that alongside with this wire. So I just kept tucking it in, taping it all the way until I had enough to reach to the transmission, and I did a little bit extra to reach up to the cluster. So I also use these waterproof automotive electrical connectors that I purchased from Amazon, and since the speed sensor has only 2 wires, I had to use the 2 wire plug obviously. So this is the male connector and this would be the female connector. So you strip the wire, you throw one of these little yellow rubber pieces on. So you have these connectors here, so these would go on the female connector. So you'd crimp this onto the wire using that top and the 2 bottom crimps. Once that's crimped onto the wire, then you go ahead and slide it into the female connector, which would be this one, and you press the wire in until you hear it snap. If you don't hear it snap, flip it around the other way and push it in until you hear it snap. Once you hear it snap, pull on the wire, tug on the wire, make sure nothing comes loose, make sure it stays in place. You'll take this connector here, which would go on the male connector, which would be this one. Same thing, you just crimp it, put it in there until you hear it snap. This is the connector I use to connect the ground wire. Since I have to make my own harness for the speed sensor to lead up to the cluster, what I had to do to start off is I had to make a hole here. So I used a pick to make a hole, and then I used a bigger screwdriver to punch through it, make the hole bigger. So what I did with this wire is after I made the hole on the firewall grommet, I cut off a piece of wire, good piece of wire. I ran it through that grommet all the way to the inside of the car. Since I was able to see it from the inside of the car, I pulled it out. Then I got my new wires that I was gonna run through the whole thing, tied it together, and then I pulled the wire that I ran through the grommet so my wire would come out. Obviously I pulled it with the insulation. I attached the insulation to it. So as I was pulling the wire, I would add the insulation as it went through, add more insulation. So I ran it all through the wheel well and through here all the way down there until I had enough wire. I ran the red wire and the black wire obviously to this plug right here, and that connected directly to the speed sensor. So I followed the transmission wire all the way up to the engine bay, following the transmission wiring harness. As you can see here, follow the transmission wire harness, zip tied it along the way. I ended up splitting it here, added a plug just in case I ever need to remove the harness, remove the engine. It'll be that much easier for me to remove. Then I followed the harness along this end right here, following the original harness. Then I brought it up in through here. It's above there so you could barely see it. You can see it a little bit better there. So I ran it through there, goes all the way back in through the firewall, comes back in through here, and it's kind of hard to see, but it's in there somewhere. So the way I ran it all the way up through here. So I did the same method I used for the grommet on the firewall. Took an extra piece of wire, I tucked it in all the way down there until I could find it down there. I pulled it and then I tied the harness to it and then pulled it back out. I got the harness through here finally. It leads to here. The black wire, I ended up grounding it here. Attaching this connector here fits perfect in there. So now we're just gonna throw another bolt over that, and that would be our ground. So it's not touching the plastic, it's touching the other bolt. As far as the power cable, ran it this way through here, all the way in through here, and we connected it to pin number 19, which is for the speed. We spliced the orange cable, we capped it off on the other end. See, the orange cable is capped up here. We just connected the red wire directly to that. And that's connected directly to the speedometer, and the speed should essentially work now. So with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and put the cluster back on. Not completely, we just need to put it up here, make sure the speed is working. Once we know that the speed is working, then we can put everything back together. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get to it. All right, moment of truth. Let's go. Oh yeah, baby, we got power. All right, so the speedometer works, and now it's time to get this car off of jacks.